All right, I believe we're live. I had originally planned this video for 11 o'clock this morning, but I stopped, got some breakfast, and you know how that slows you down, right? So you don't want to make a video when you're slowed down. So we have a new open waiting list. This is going to be for Tempe, Arizona. And a few things about this, and I'm going to put up some links for you guys real quick, if I can get this microphone to do right. Let's see if we can get you guys set up. This first link here is going to be for y'all to start. And I'm going to link it up here. Now, this list opened up at 8 a.m. this morning, but I wouldn't be in too big a hurry. In most cases, they end up running late anyway. So 8 a.m. And they're going to be running this basically to the 13th of February. Now, for those of you that live in the state of Arizona, and one thing I want to be very clear is you don't necessarily have to be a resident of the state of Arizona or even this particular county. People from all over the nation, it's a federal program, and unless there is a requirement that you actually have to live there, and in most cases, they do give some priority if you live in the county, but if you're outside the county or the state, then you take a little less priority. But I think this is pretty much open for anybody. So from February 28th today, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd imagine that would be Pacific Standard Time, all the way to March 13th, you'll be able to apply and utilize the link that I just put in the live chat. Now, one thing you're going to pay close attention to when you get to the website is going to be the eligibility and waiting list information, because they do have income limits. We'll talk about that just for a brief moment. Now, if you're a single person, your maximum guideline on that's going to be $30,950. For those of you with two adults in the home, $35,350, and for three, $39,750. You have a utility allowance also with this, and that comes with most vouchers. You know, when you rent, in most cases, it does include a utility allowance, and so you should be okay. All right. Beyond that, I'm going to talk about the tenant information that you're going to be looking at, and that's going to be. Let's take a look at the portability real quick. Portability for the Housing Choice Voucher allows you to move the voucher, and in this case, you must be living in the city of Tempe, and I hope I'm saying that right when they issued the Housing Choice Voucher, or you must be a current participant, fully completed a portability request, and not have any outstanding debts with any housing authority, and be in compliance with all family obligations. In other words, your HAP contract if you previously had one. And so, all right, still struggling with this microphone. Beyond that, I think that Arizona, as many of you know, through the pandemic, the state of California was hit particularly hard. And because of that, a lot of the overflow from the state of California inundated Arizona and it inundated New Mexico to the point that it kind of knocked out all the vouchers and they got absorbed and more people migrated. And so now that that stuff has cooled off, you still have a really great opportunity to apply, and without the huge crowds of people needing it as they once did. The thing I'm going to tell you about this is we're still in that prime season between January, February, March, and April. As we move closer into the summer, June, July, and August, that's when it's like a Black Friday sale at 3 in the morning. People are wrapped around the block. Right now, we're still in the easy season because people are more preferentially like to move and get vouchers during the summer periods. So you have a half of the year where it's kind of bad, and the other half, I would say, starting around October, November, December, it really cools off, and then you have January, February, March, and a little bit of April. And then from a little bit past April all the way into summer, it becomes hellish. Okay. So if you're going to step on the gas and do this, I would suggest doing that. As a introduction, real quick, my name is Jay. I am the owner of Section8Consulting.com. I probably have outlasted and outmade every consultant on YouTube or any social media platform over a decade. Okay. I do not make these videos as a measure of to make nickels and pennies for ad revenue. I'm an actual consultant. Okay, so let's make a distinction between people that entertain on YouTube and those that teach and do consulting work. As far as I'm aware, there are no other consultants making videos. Therefore, most of the other folks that are making these videos have done some light research on Google, and their understanding is as much as they would probably understand a fidget spinner. Okay, there is no easy three tips and tricks to getting vouchers. It's a complicated process. It takes time, and it's further convoluted by a lack of funding and other issues out there. And of course, dealing with your local PHA or public housing authority, we sometimes run into personalities of people that work there that genuinely may come across as condescending or even rude. Okay, so you have to be able to deal with adversity through this process. Let's talk about some of the pre-application things that matter. So a lot of people believe, oh well, I'm disabled and I'm a senior, I should be number one on the list. Look, you being old or you being disabled is not going to distinguish you from anybody. Okay, let me tell you why. Nearly 90% of all people that apply are already old and already disabled. That means there's a big herd of people that are already handicapped and old. Okay. So if everybody already looks the same, then it means you all have an even chance to get this. It's only when you start adding other preferences. Now, let's talk about the housing authority, this application, and what real preferences are. It's like a cake. You got a cake, you bake it, and then you get ready to ice it. Each layer you ice on there makes that cake a little sweeter, right? Well, with vouchers and applying, the more preferences. And these preferences mean the more problems fundamentally you and your life has, is more opportunities for you to be considered higher or lower on the list, unless it is a lottery. Okay. Some housing authorities have a lottery, which means they pick anybody. They don't care whether or not they're old or whatever. They just pick whoever comes up as a number. And then you have most housing authorities that don't do lotteries, and they're going to consider whether or not you're a veteran, whether or not you're 55 plus or 62 plus. They're going to consider whether or not you're disabled. Let's talk about distinguishing factors of what disabled is. Most of you have it in your mind, from what you've learned on the news and random stuff you read on the internet, that disabilities are determined by the Social Security Administration for a disability check. Look, HUD, which receives federal funds from Congress, HUD is one federal agency here. The Social Security Administration that issues disability checks is over here. Two different agencies. Both these agencies have a different idea of what disabilities are. Now, if you go down to the Social Security Administration and you want a check from these people every month, okay, for a disability, you've got a lot of proof. You need an attorney, you need a lawyer, you got to go see a judge, and it takes years to prove that disability. HUD is a housing agency, okay? It's an agency that allocates funds to your local housing authority, and their idea of a disabled will be more likely is a much lower standard. In other words, something that is affecting how you see, hear, feel, talk, speak, mobility, mental health, and other issues. And so the standards are very low, and in most cases, do not be your own doctor. I mean, if there are people that have got back problems that have qualified as somewhat disabled and for housing, okay? People with asthma, people with all kinds of issues you wouldn't even think were disabilities would be a disability in the eyes of HUD or the Federal Code of Regulation that determines whether or not you have a problem that's going to exist greater than 12 months that affects that quality of life. Okay, so quit playing doctor. You need to lay everything out on the table for them. And if it says on there that you have a disability, you better just check it until you can determine whether or not you really have one. You guys not checking it because you have it in your mind, you got to be in a wheelchair. Okay, there's lots of things qualify as a disabled. Don't make that fatal mistake. That could back you way down that list without it. Another thing, out of all the things that you can be, there are three preferential preferences that are more important than almost all of them. Number one is a disability. Number two, we can all guess. Well, nobody's talking, so I guess I'll just go ahead and tell you. So besides disability would be homelessness or imminent homelessness. In other words, you're in a situation where you're in your home and you're just at the point where you can no longer pay the rent. It's getting to that point where you can no longer afford it. You're about to be put out of there. Then you have cases of actual homelessness, which means where you're living in a place that wasn't designed for a human to really live there, like your car. A lighter form of homelessness could be surfing couches. You don't have a mortgage at the bank that you're paying on. You're not on a lease. Then who's to say whether or not you're sleeping in that car? Who's to say whether or not you're camping in the woods, sleeping on the sidewalk? And no, guys, in order to prove homelessness, you do not need to check into the local homeless shelter. That has been a media blitz of that stuff to convince people otherwise. Now, it's morally and ethically ambiguous as to whether or not you want to tell the truth, the whole truth, or a lie, right? Well, that lies on you, not me, okay? So the ambiguity of this all is simply this. If you're going to play a rigged game, okay, I'm not suggesting anybody needs to lie, but if you're going to play a rigged game where you may or may not get something, you better at least play to win, okay? If you don't understand what that means, you're watching the wrong video. So I'm not suggesting anybody needs to lie. What I'm saying is if you're not legally blind on a Monday and you know what rules it means to be blind, then I would suggest you go down to the doctor and talk to him, make sure damn sure before you apply on a Friday that you're legally blind. That's, of course, an extreme example, but you see my point. If you understand exactly what gives you that qualification and you may not have it already, then you may need to go out there and get it, okay? Everything's for hire in this business, even your doctors, okay? Beyond that, so we know now that homelessness, we know that disability are primary factors, and there's a third one, and this one is actually more powerful than the first two. It's almost like jet fuel, and it almost has a sprinkling of magic powers. It's called domestic violence, or DV, and the reason it's special is because a claim of that in any form, whether it's mental abuse, physical abuse, or whether a person's stalking you or defrauding you of your money and assets and other things, you're under threat, or you're being trafficked for some sexual purpose. The point of it is it makes them consider you above and beyond others, and it also forces most PHAs in the application process to move that application twice as quick. In other words, you'd have a better shot than a person that was 98 in a wheelchair dying of cancer if you had DV written into this. If you got two of the big three, you're going to do exceptionally well. If you got all three, then you're doing really well, okay? If you don't have any of these, then you're somewhere between the middle of the list and the very bottom of it. And so beyond that, let's talk about being 55 plus and 62. Federal guidelines or Code of Federal Regulations says 62, okay? But in some cases, 55 could be adequate to prove some form of being a senior, okay? Beyond that, I want to roll right back to disability. It only requires a person in the household to be disabled. It doesn't need to be you. It could be you could be your child. It could be your mother living with you. It doesn't have to be you, okay? It does not also need to be the person that is the primary applicant of the application. It could be anybody in the household composition, okay? Be clear. So the big three, veterans, seniors. Now let's talk about credit scores. A lot of you guys believe fundamentally that your credit score affects your ability to get a voucher. No, it does not. Look, most people already that are pursuing a voucher already have major credit problems. Let's face that reality. Life is tough. Not every bill gets paid, right? Some are able to achieve perfect credit. Some are not. Look, credit only affects, in most cases, only affects you when you're getting out there to utilize the voucher. To be honest with you, I don't really believe there's any federal rule that I've read where they have to check your credit score and find you credit worthy to receive a voucher. It simply doesn't exist. So you're going off of old information, or it really what needs to be dispelled as a rumor. All right. But your credit will affect you. Now, let's be clear about something. The housing authority has intolerabilities when it comes to criminal records. Most of us have either committed a crime, been arrested for something, or know somebody that has. Okay. And so I don't want to implicate anybody in the video, but let's suggest that there are a couple of things of consideration. One, there are three things that most housing authorities will not tolerate, and that is SO, or sex offender. Number two, those that have been caught or engaged in the use of or distribution of methamphetamines. And why that particular drug rather than others, I don't know. Okay. There must have been something back that rolled through the 90s when they were trying to go hard on it. And the third thing is those of you that have been convicted of a violent crime against humanity, humans, children, elderly, or even potentially animals. And to be frank with you, as a company, I don't even take cases where people have had cases of abuse, because it's kind of like being a Democrat or Republican. You have to draw a line morally and ethically on who you're going to help. And if a person's actively engaging in the abuse of people or animals and stuff like that, that goes against directly everything that I believe, unless there's some situation where there was something going on domestically between a man and a woman where it may not be true. But in most cases, I'll turn those cases down, because look, the housing authorities are going to take them. I really don't want that kind of business either. So You have to understand my position. We draw a line morally and ethically. Beyond that, so the criminal record. Now, for everything else, I would suggest to you that as long as it's been over 5 years, that it's not going to be looked at as a microscope. And generally, if you committed the crime in a whole nother state or a whole nother county, then the odds of it really popping up and rearing its ugly head, as far as the housing authority is concerned, is not so much. But should you lie on your application to say you've got nothing, do not do that. A lot of you have convinced yourself because you committed a DUI in 1953 that you no longer have a criminal record. That's not true, and a lot of that stuff can be found. Do not lie. Lying on these applications is a big deal, okay? So the credit score, I think that we understand that fundamentally people have good ones and bad ones, and it does not really affect the outcome of whether or not you'd receive the voucher. Criminal records do play a role in it if you've had it less than 5 years. And then, of course, the 3 or 4 things that they pretty much will not accept you for, okay? Beyond that, income always has played a major role in whether or not vouchers are going to be disputed. If you make too much, you're just not going to do it. Now, every housing authority in America has an income ratio in which they will suggest to you that you're moderate income, you're low income, and you're extreme income. Now, as long as you're one of those 3, you're okay. But there's one of those 3 that matter more than the other 2, and that's extreme low income. When you're at the bottom of the tier, it definitely gives you preferential points and moves you up and down the list. Now, being just so you talk about extreme low income. Now, low income and moderate income don't have any impact. It just means that you qualify. You see the point? Now, that is determined by every individual PHA. And as many of you know, most PHAs are public housing authorities, or either city owned and operated, or they're publicly owned or privately owned. Okay. So I bet you guys didn't realize that a lot of housing authorities are privately owned as an investment situation. Okay. Moving on from that, I want to talk about veterans now. VA. Most of you guys, everybody knows somebody that may be connected in the family by friends or whatever, but veterans fall under a different program generally. So yes, they may receive a housing choice voucher, but a lot of that has to do with what we call the HUD VASH. And VASH is VASH, HUD VASH program. And that could be, a lot of times they have a HUD VASH specialist, or you have somebody that specializes in the VA program that will work at the housing authority if it's large enough. If not, then you could address that through the local VA. If not, then you can just check the box, because not everybody in America lives in a big city that's going to afford them to have a local VA, or to have a big monstrous housing authority where they have a designated personnel there that's from the VA, okay? But veterans do carry status because they served the country, and it doesn't matter if they served it through gunshots or whether or not they were behind a computer. It doesn't matter. The mere fact that any person would serve the country without knowing whether or not they would live or die, you're taking that gamble. You serve the country. You deserve that right. You get that, okay? So veterans clearly do take preference, and they do fall under several programs. Let's talk about some individual things when it comes to those preferences and how that may play out in specialized codes of federal regulation in Title 24. Okay, so we're talking about federal regulations, titles, codes, acts, and of course, ordinances, right? So we look at, I think, the different types of programs and how they're funded. So most of you fundamentally believe, and I'm going to pretend this tissue is a voucher, a piece of paper, right? Depending on who you are and how you fill out your application will depend on how that voucher is funded. So a voucher is a voucher. It's an empty container until it's filled with some type of funding. So we'll call it a string of funding from Congress, or a string of funding from HUD, or the Urban Department of Urban Development and Indian Affairs. We must always put that in there out of respect for those Indians. Okay. So if a person is 62 years and older and they apply and they're given all their preferences and answers, one of the first things they would likely qualify in their voucher would be they would be connected to a string of funding called subsection 202 for seniors, okay? And that section 202 is not a voucher, it's how the funding comes down, and it means that it's an elderly person applying for housing or subsidy, and it would give them wraparound resources. For those that are 18 years old as an adult, when you first arrive at adult, and you expand that from 18 to the age of 61, just short of 62, then you could pull a string down to fill the voucher with funding. And again, when we're talking about sections, we're actually just like tax law, we're talking about subsections, okay? But it's not subsections of tax law whatsoever. It's subsections code. But that would be section 811. So 18 to 61 would be pulling funding from subsection 811, okay? And then you have other more mixed types of vouchers that come under different funded programs. As an example, HOPWA, HOPWA, for those with HIV or AIDS that may be working with other programs like the Ryan White. Okay. And then we move on to some of the other ones, like we had mentioned, HUD Bash, that deal specifically with our veterans serving under the military or United States Coast Guard. And then you have even different programs that are still federally funded under what I call homeless programs. So in the old days, the housing voucher was the primary issuance. So when HUD allocated funds to the state allocates down to PHA for a budget. They used to take the housing authority would be the person issuing emergency housing vouchers. As time has gone on and emergencies get bigger and bigger, like the pandemic, now we've rolled into a system where we separated those that have imminent housing problems and those that just simply have a funding problem to get housing. And so that was where we roll ourselves into homelessness, and imminent homelessness would be rolled through the Continuum of Care Program, or ESG, okay? And in some states, they may call it BOSS, BOSS. And so all these different systems are under the Housing First Initiative or Act from the United States Title and Code, okay? And what that does is it allows them to receive funding under a nonprofit to issue vouchers under three types or kinds of premises. And the premise would be one, emergency housing voucher for those that took an assessment. They entered the points into HIMS, which is a homeless information management system. And that system / algorithm will make a determination of the number of points. And those points thus would kick out a score, and the score would obviously be able to yield you a specific type of voucher. However, as time goes on, utilizing Housing First programs for emergency housing vouchers, permanent supportive housing, and rapid rehousing, what we're starting to see more and more often is the vouchers, even if you score high enough, you may not get the emergency voucher if they don't have it available, and they may kick you down a tier. Now, that's the tough part, especially if you've gone in and you scored really high, you've done really well. Nobody wants to hear, oh, by the way, well, thank you so much for that. That was the highest score ever registered in the state of California, but unfortunately, we're out of money. Or unfortunately, we don't have that type of voucher right now, so we're going to relegate you back to the next nearest one. And unfortunately, with these three vouchers, every step you move down is pretty big. It's monumental. So if you don't have an emergency housing voucher and you get moved down to permanent supportive housing, that would be like giving you a housing choice voucher and saying, oh, by the way, you had the choice of housing. Now we're going to move you to project-based housing because we're out of vouchers. And then even worse than that is you have a rapid rehousing, which is good to get people off their feet that don't have fundamental problems, that aren't seniors that are retired or on a fixed income. And so the rapid rehousing is more like, we're going to pay rent. We're going to pay all the rent for a couple of months. Then we're going to back it down 20% each additional month until it vanishes. In other words, they're going to help you, and each consecutive payment going forward is going to be less and less and less until there just isn't a payment. So I'll call it an exploding voucher because it's only present for as long as they fund it. And you get back down to that, that's pretty scary because that means it's like lighting your pants or your shoes on fire and saying, hey, you better figure out what you're going to do because we're only going to pay for this so long. And even as we're paying it each month, it's going to be less and less. And so you're going out there and you score the highest score in the state of California. It turns out your county just ain't got that much money, the PHA there or the Housing First program. And then you get back down to RRH. And then, of course, you're probably going pretty crazy because you don't want to do that. So sometimes you have to address several different systems. So we've established that there are Housing First programs under ESG, and so on. We have housing authorities over here. And then, of course, in the center is a third system, which is subsidies. That's when a landlord goes, hey, I'd like to do a handshake deal with the PHA and the local city government. And what I'd like to do there is I'm going to buy the building. I'm going to build the building. And when I build it, I'm going to trade you tax credits. In other words, all those bills at the end of the year, when you got to pay taxes for that building, we're going to trade you. So under LITch program. And then what it does is by them making that agreement for 10 or 15 years under LITch program, it locks them in. And then you end up in a situation where they have to allocate a certain number of those units in that building, so many to the disabled, so many to the seniors, and so many to whoever that has a voucher. And so that would be a subsidy, because why? You're not going to that new building they built with a voucher. You're going there, and if they have funding for each doorknob, and a third of the doorknobs are for the people that are disabled, another third is for those that are senior, and then the last third of the buildings for whoever you want without any consequence, and that's what it would be, but no voucher was required. And even more convoluted is you could actually accept a combination of both vouchers and it also being a subsidized building. In other words, you're receiving subsidy. And often in the past, subsidies were only 50%. In other words, 50% of your income versus a voucher which is usually 70%, okay? 70% payment and then 30% of your income based on the fair market rates for the area. So that's a lot, right? All right, I'm going to address a few of these comments here. Good afternoon, Gale Resources. How are you today? By the way, it's a live video, guys. Shook Shields, does credit affect your Section 8? No. What about VA disability income? Well, income is income. Anything that is, think of it this way. Anything that goes through that checking account, that's income. That is your gross income. Makes no difference. Now, they will look at that and they'll determine whether that income is a negative income or what I call a negative asset, because I do realize you got children and you're receiving money for those children from the state. Then it could, if you're spending it on the children, then is it really income? Is there any opportunity where that's something that you've received and would actually be able to use to pay towards rent? So there are considerations for negative assets or negative funds. Shook Shields, do you have to make 3 plus the rent? Now, rents, let's make another factor here, a distinguishing factor when it comes to vouchers and housing. Once you receive that voucher and you take it to the landlord, whatever rules they have there, that's just the rules. So if they tell you they want 51 times the rent, then that's what they want. Unless they grossly violate federal or state law, then that's what it is. If they tell you got to have a deposit, you got to have a deposit. HUD does not control that. Now, you do understand that landlords are under a HAP contract with these landlords to some degree, but whatever their management or the management office decides is appropriate for that building is not within the jurisdiction of the local housing authority. The housing authority is there to give you a voucher and is to do a housing quality inspection, and that is the end of their control over that building. And again, unless it violates some type of federal state law, then whatever is pretty much they're asking is what's going to be required, and that includes whatever credit scores they may consider as well. Now, let's keep in mind, now, if they're accepting vouchers, clearly they're probably not going to set the rents too high, okay? And that, well, I probably kicking myself in the mouth with that one, because actually I do see a lot of landlords these days accepting vouchers and they have unrealistic rent, which means I don't see how anybody would even have a voucher that could afford to live there. It almost seems like a big joke. Gladys Reyes, need to apply is for New York. I don't understand what you're telling me. What about New York? This is for Arizona, okay? So just in case you're confused, and actually just check, because actually it's rarely do I double check myself. This is for Arizona, and this particular video is just about the Tempe, and if I'm saying it right, Arizona open waiting list, and this is what it's for. All right, guys, so I think it's time to wrap this up. There's no reason for me to ramble. If y'all have any questions in relation to the video, applications, the process I've gone through, please ask now. It's still a live video. It will not be live in about 10 minutes, so anybody got questions, please don't sit back and be quiet. Now is the time to ask. While y'all thinking about whether or not you'd like to speak, I'm going to put up the information for our company. It's our website, booking software, and so on if you need help. And again, consulting works about this. Let's be very clear about this. Consulting work that we do at section8consulting.com is specifically working with clients to do casework. This is where we're trying to work with people to navigate a process that can be difficult. There are lots of things that can be in there. Now, look, any idiot can fill out an application. I make no distinction, and we certainly don't charge anybody on the premise that we're going to charge you to fill out an application, and we're going to charge you a special rate to get a higher lower on the waiting list. We don't engage in that. That's illegal. Okay, what we do is consult, and a lot of it, I think, is unraveling the misinformation across the market, and of course, it becomes complex when you deal with housing authorities because their job is to issue vouchers. They don't educate. They're not going to sit on the phone all day. They're not going to hold your hand. And in most cases, the conversations can be rather mundane if they'll even allow it or even answer the phone. That's the times that we live in. And of course, the plethora of misinformation that has been published across the internet. Now that we live in what we call news feed algorithms, that means they're taking articles that were written 10 years ago, they're respinning them, rehashing them all over Google. Look, the Housing Authority, Section 8 HUD, federal programs, Title 24, and everything that goes into this system has been around, 80 years? Fundamentally, it's changed about 80 times. It's not even the same system it was 4 years ago. So reading articles, tips, and tricks, and other crazy stuff across Google, will yield you nothing. And beyond that, every PHA or every public housing authority across the 2,800 counties that I can think of, every public housing authority has a separate policy, procedures, stated and standards in which they follow. All that stuff can be underwritten by companies like Ned & McKay and many others. In other words, though there are federal rules as a boilerplate to how PHA should be acting and under federal oversight, it also means that every PHA operates completely different. So you read this wonderful article, 51 ways to win the voucher, a bunch of nonsense, okay, on Google, all right? Well, that's great for the person who wrote the article if you happen to live in that zip code. And to understand the fundamentals across the U.S., you'd have to deal with thousands of housing authorities. And the only way to do that is do it as long as I have, where you're dealing with all 50 states and you deal with hundreds of housing authorities, okay? Then you truly understand the totality and the gravity of the situation, and you start learning the differences. There are a lot of things that are alike, and there are a lot of things that are not, because policies that are adopted by a public housing authority are adopted to match the local community, and that's why it's so vastly different. And what may be acceptable to one will not be acceptable to another. And so, yeah, if you're going to be an expert or a consultant, you got to be an expert in all of it, not just one little town. Okay. All right. So I see some comments here. Finally, you guys got brave and decided to ask a few. Groovy American Tourist. I lost my voucher because I could not find housing in 60 days with the extension, and they said I appeal it, and you should appeal it. I said you can't appeal it. Well, it doesn't matter what they say. You most certainly could. If they're not going to allow you to appeal it, then you need to take that up to HUD's regional office and then file it with the FHEO. Okay, FHEO. Because they're the feds. They mandate what should or should not happen and what's okay and what's not. Blessing and pushing 101. So if you're homeless in a domestic violence situation, 3 kids and on disability, my points go higher. Again, when I say points, guys, that's for y'all. That's for you, for your mind. There's not really points, okay, guys? The point thing is for me to help you kind of visualize what I'm talking about. Well, let's just say go up and down. So that means your preferences will make you go up and down a list based on how many preferences you have. Okay. So fundamentally, yes, to the question you asked, Blessing and pushing 101. Gently moving. Can a Texas resident apply for an Arizona voucher? Yes. So let's go back to dispelling those rumors. I would estimate out of all housing authorities, roughly probably over 3,000 around the nation. When you pull federal funds from Congress, it means it's a federal program. And in most cases, housing authorities may not like it, but in most cases, 30% of the time, they will grant portability, which means you do not need to actually live there. All right. Now, if this was sponsored or paid for by the state or taxpayer money in the city of Arizona or the state of Arizona, then they can restrict that, okay? So 70% of the time, they're going to say, look, this is going to only be for local people, or this is only going to be for this county and surrounding. But 30% of the time, they'll grant portability. And in many places like Iowa's notorious for granting vouchers and then telling you, we don't care whether you port it or not. Now, I'm not suggesting they're currently doing that. But yes, so there is a kind of an even, a little bit uneven balances to the number of places that would or would not. So I would suggest to you guys to apply at as many housing authorities, regardless of the location. And if they allow you to port, then do so. Blessing goes on to say, I'm in a DV situation. I live in PH. You have a project-based. Okay, so you have project-based and signed the BA. So you're in BAWA paperwork. PHA still won't help me. So what was me signing the paperwork for? Blessing, I don't know. I don't know anything about you or your case. And because of the sensitive nature in which the things you're discussing in a live chat in a public forum, I would be unwilling to discuss it in this manner, okay? Because there's just a lot of problems legally with that. Yeah, I'll give you a link. You want to talk to us or a company, I'd be glad to talk to you about your case, but we're certainly not going to get into those kind of details in a live video. Okay, it's just not the correct way to conduct business. I like to give advice, guys, but when the subject matter gets too serious, then I'm not going to do that in a public format. Okay. All right, guys. It looks like we've kind of addressed the questions. It looks like it's a pretty light crowd tonight. Sometimes it's a big one, but I just wanted to get it out that Arizona's up, and we got a couple more videos coming out, and we'll be discussing some other things about seniors, disabled, and so on. And looks like it'll be in about another day or two. And typically I make videos on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, typically at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. If I don't, then on rare occasions I make them in the afternoon like this, okay? I've enjoyed talking with you guys, and I hope that your journey to get housing, to apply, and so on will bring you what you need. And I do think the market's starting to normalize. So I think that a lot of people may find what they're pursuing. Okay. All right, guys. Y'all have a great afternoon. It's been fun talking to you. Goodbye.